Hello, folks. We are live, or at least at the moment, I am live. I will bring Gary Jones on screen presently. I'll bring myself on screen presently as well. I just want to make sure that we know that I'm live before I start doing anything clever. If you're here, if you're watching already, look, that's telling me I'm live. So if you're already here, then please do me the honour of saying hello, giving us a like and that sort of thing. Let's do that so that you can see me, and let's do that so that we're ready to go with Gary. Just whilst I'm waiting, just whilst I'm waiting for people to arrive, I will just be down here editing really quickly so that I make sure that we tag Gary in here. I'm trying to tag you rather than Gary Vaynerchuk, which is what we want to do. So let's do exactly that. So I've got Gary tagged in the post. I'm going to be talking to Gary about podcasting, about how to get started with podcasting, how to grow your podcast, how to grow your audience if you're already podcasting. We've got people watching us, Gary. We've got the wonderful Jennifer Ellis, who I was chatting to earlier on. We've got the equally wonderful Wes Linden, who I'll see in a couple of weeks. And let me introduce Gary. I've known Gary for years. Gary is an absolutely professional, serial, multiple networker around the Midlands in the UK. He's the supremo on podcasting and the founder of Grow Radio. And his beard action is even better than mine. Hello, Gary. Was that a good enough introduction? Have I told people what they need to know about you?
No, I love that intro. Yeah, basically, I just talk about podcasting and loads of stuff on social media. That's pretty much what I do. But yeah, no, absolutely fantastic intro, and thanks for having me on your show.
No, I've been really excited about talking to you because you and I talk quite a lot. To my shame, I don't have a podcast myself at the moment, so I've wanted to talk to you about that, and I thought we might as well do it publicly. I'm very grateful to Jen and Wes and anyone else who is here already. If anyone's got any questions about podcasting or networking or anything else throughout the live broadcast, pop them down in the comments. I will bring your comment up on screen just like that, and we'll answer your question live. By the way, don't be surprised if you ask a question if I repeat it out loud, because it makes much more sense on the replay and on the podcast, which this will go out as a podcast. It makes much more sense if people know what the question is. So I'm going to start by asking you, Gary, how did you get started with podcasting? I don't think I've ever asked you before.
No, so it was about 8 years ago. Well, actually, I'll skip back a few years before that. Started listening to podcasts as a general listener when I was commuting between Oxford and Warwick. So it's about a 45-minute kind of train trip each way. And I just literally found a magazine article about podcasts. It was about the topic that I was reading about. So at that time, it was triathlons. And I started listening to them. And I found that it was a great way of kind of immersing myself into this culture, into the lives of the triathletes, which previously I was just literally reading. Now I'm listening, I'm hearing their stories from them. And actually, from there, I started listening to podcasts for quite a while. And then about 8 years ago, I contacted via Twitter a local radio station, just on the off chance to see if I could become a guest on one of their shows. It was literally just a simple kind of quick tweet to them. Just thought I'd chance my luck, and I had a meeting with them the following day. And at the time, I formed my own network in the local area called Leamington Hour, where I was talking to local businesses, and I was kind of linking people up with each other, and through the networking, helping them to kind of gain clients. And also, at the time, I had the idea that I could start interviewing them. And that's what the Radio Warwickshire really wanted to kind of bring out. So they offered me my own show. But the only problem was that I had this open invitation to have my own show, which effectively at the time was a podcast. You uploaded the file onto their server, so it was technically a podcast. But I literally had 2 weeks to learn how to podcast using just a phone. So that's how I started podcasting. I literally started. It was started off literally as a tweet sent out to a radio station, and then literally using my phone to interview people. That's kind of how I got started. But that was 8 years ago, and the industry and podcasting has moved on a little bit since then. Certainly due to numbers of listeners and shows being released and shows available. But primarily for me, it's the same principle. It's a great tool for anyone to listen to people, to gain a bit of information, to have a little bit of fun listening to them, to have a chat. But do you know what? If you're nosy like me, it's a great way just to kind of get a great insight into their lives and what they're doing. So that's kind of how I got started in podcasting.
Back at the beginning of the century, I was driving to London for work, and would have a 2-hour drive to work and a 2-hour drive back. And I used to listen to cassettes, Zig Ziglar and things like that. I'm thinking this is sort of the modern version of doing that. I used to listen to motivational stuff as I needed motivation. I used to leave home at 5:20 in the morning, but I used to put cassettes in the car, and I'm thinking this is sort of a modern version of that in a way.
It kind of is, because the beauty of podcasting is it's on demand, so you can listen to it anytime, and you can listen to it, as you said in your example, when you're doing other stuff. So people listen to podcasts when they're driving, when they're walking, when they're going to the gym, when they're cleaning, and loads of other places. Just a background noise in the office, just to name a few. But they listen to it in loads of different places. And I did a similar kind of commute for a little while, and I was listening to audiobooks, and I compare podcasts a lot to audiobooks, that the fact that you can break down a longer episode into different chunks, and you can listen to them, use it in the time that you've got to listen to them. But exactly that, it's basically getting the information to you when you need it, and on your terms rather than on their terms.
I listen to other people for inspiration. I'm always interested in other people's ideas, how other people are presenting those ideas, and I'm always listening to stuff. I tend to listen to audiobooks, usually on the treadmill, actually, usually at the gym. That's when I listen to audiobooks. What, for those who are uneducated like me, what's the sort of basic difference then between an audiobook and a podcast?
So the main difference is that an audiobook, primary, they're pretty much exactly the same, but an audiobook is much, much longer form content. Typically, an audiobook would be hours long, and that would be anywhere between probably 2 hours to 18 hours, 20 hours, a much longer block of content, and that's normally about one topic. Obviously, it's broken down into chapters, but primarily it's one big bulk load of content. A podcast normally is much shorter episodes, ranging from anywhere between 5 minutes to maybe a couple of hours per episode, but typically it's around a half-hour mark. And each episode is normally themed, or it's got a general kind of link to the previous episode. So it's probably more similar to a TV show or a radio show, where you've got different episodes in the series. And an audiobook is almost like a film, if we're going to use that kind of analogy, where you've got a much longer form content rather than a TV show. If that makes sense. I don't know if it does.
No, everything that you're saying makes sense, and I'm being a bit selfish because I'm asking the questions that I want the answers to as well. Now, in fact, the wonderful Damien Bridgman has joined us, and it's lovely to see you, Damien. It's lovely to see your comments pop up at least. The wonderful Damien Bridgman has asked, what's the best equipment to use for podcasting? I'm going to change Damien's question and we can come back to it in a second, because I think the question I'd like to break Damien's question down into a couple of questions, and I think I'd like to start. You've already mentioned, Gary, that you got started with just using your phone to podcast, and that's pretty much how I started with everything. What equipment do you need to get started? Is a phone still good enough to get started with podcasting?
So effectively, with podcasting, you need the main bit of kit you need is somehow or some equipment to record the audio. That's the main principle. That's the main bit of equipment you need. Now, a phone actually does the job really well, because what you've got with a phone is you've got the microphone just there, or if you've got earbuds or an external, you can use that, and you can put it to your mouth. So actually, it records the voice quite well, and it minimizes the background noise around you. Now, for some people, that's okay, but other people, it might not be. And so, the best equipment really for you is what you've tend to I normally say to people is what you've already got. So doing a phone, absolutely fine if it's a phone that records the quality of sound. Okay, if you've got a computer and it's got a decent audio card, that might do the job, but you might need an external mic. For me, one of the biggest misconceptions is that of podcasting is that you need loads of expensive equipment to start off with. And as I said at the start, for me, that's simply not true. Simply not true. Normally, what you've got to hand will probably do. Okay, it won't be the sharpest quality. It might not give the richness of your tone of your voice as much as a microphone would, but it will do the job. So it all depends on what you've got and what level of what level of quality podcast you want to go for. You've got to marry those up. But to answer your question, yeah, it's definitely good enough. Definitely good enough. And the phone 8 years ago wasn't as good as the quality phone that I've got now. So phones are only improving in terms of the technology inside it. But yeah, don't be fooled that you need hundreds or thousands of pounds worth of equipment to get started with podcasting. You honestly don't. You really don't.
I'm really interested in that because I think like you, I know a ton of people who've got really good video equipment and have never posted anything on YouTube. I know a ton of people who've got much better sound equipment than me and have never done a podcast. I started a podcast and then stopped. We'll come back in a minute to that, and I'm going to answer later on in the program. Let's talk about Damien's a question in a round way about what's the best equipment when you get started. But I think my advice to people always on social media, and I'm interested to know if you agree with this or not, is to start and see if you build up momentum with it, and then to start to invest in kit when you've done so, rather than investing in kit for a podcast that you only do for one episode, or a video show that you do for one episode. I do these lives with relatively light kit. Actually, I've got a Logitech camera. I've got a piece of kit called Switcher that I actually run it from. Plus, a couple of lights to make me look a little bit better. We've got questions coming in from Damien and Wes as well, which I'm going to come to, as well as the kit. Gary, how do people get their podcast from a recording of their voice or a recording of them and a guest? How do they get it from there to the internet, actually out to Spotify and Apple and etc. etc.? How do they do that bit?
It's really quite simple. What you've got is different podcast hosts, different podcast distribution centers online. They're all places where it's all different places where basically you upload your file to them, and then they'll share it out to all of these different platforms. So the ones that I recommend to people are ones like Libsyn, Podbean, Audioboom. There's loads of them out there. And basically, once you've recorded your file, you just upload it to there, and then it forms RSS feeds to these different places, and it goes from there. Apple Podcasts is a little bit different, and you have to actually kind of have to have the feed first, and then you basically go into it, and so they can verify it. But apart from that, that process takes a couple of hours. Sometimes it could take a day or so, but that's possibly the most simplest part of it. The hardest part for most people, and we can crack on with this later on if you want to, is actually forming the idea from the podcast, and actually then making sure that the podcast is really robust, it's suitable for the audience, it gives massive value. And that's the bit that normally takes a lot more time rather than the technical stuff from there. But if we want to talk about that now, we can do it. If not, we can talk about it in a bit. But the idea is the one thing that that most people should really talk about and really kind of take their time thinking about more than anything else.
Right, that's just blown my mind. So, because all of the questions that we're getting pretty much are about the kit, the tech,
Oh,
and actually, you want to wind people back a little bit further. So let's come to that in a second, because that's really something for people to talk about, and I reckon that thought will be incredibly useful. I started with Anchor. Is that now owned by Spotify? Is that still a good way to start? Is that still a decent starting point that
is
other
it?
products exist as well?
Yeah, yeah. As I say, there's thousands of these places where you can put your podcast and then it sends these links out. Anchored by Spotify, or Spotify podcast is a really good place to start off with. It gives you a level of kind of, yeah. It doesn't do all the stuff that other platforms do, but it's a start. And this is the beauty of the different podcast hosts. Each of them do pretty much the same job, but in a slightly different way. So it's about finding the right one for you. But yeah, Anchor by Spotify, happy days. It's a good solid platform to go for.
I'm just going to I'm going to come back to your point about thinking about the actual podcast itself and what you're going to talk about, because I reckon that's
Yeah,
I think that's incredibly interesting, because I think everyone gets so worked up about what tech they should use that they don't actually think about what they're going to talk about and whether people will be interested
that's
in
it.
it. I'm just going to deal with Wes's interesting question, because Wes has asked, should a podcast these days be audio only, or should it include video as well? And I'm really interested in your thoughts on that. And then I've got some thoughts on that as well, Gary.
It's a great question. Absolutely great question. So for me, it's all about your audience and how they absorb content. For me, that's the number one question. Most people most people tend to learn in three different ways, don't they? They normally read, listen, or watch. They're the three different ways that people kind of absorb content they normally learn. So for me, if you have just your podcast as audio, what happens to the people who like to watch interviews and want to watch and kind of have it on a screen? They're going to miss out. So for me, it's all about figuring out your audience and then working out whether they want it to be video and audio or just audio. Because primary podcasts are audio, but actually, do you know what? If you're recording the content and you've got the content via video, why don't you release it anyway on YouTube? It's the second biggest search engine. It makes sense. So for me, it's a no-brainer. You have it on video and audio, but ultimately, it all depends on your audience, and also depends on how comfortable you are on camera and how comfortable your guests are on camera. You've got to factor that in as well. But as kind of a marketer kind of point of view, content creator point of view, yeah, if you're going to be spending your time recording content and then distributing it, might as well do the video as well.
Wes, what I'm doing with this, following on from Gary's answer, which I completely agree with. I like the idea of repurposing. So I am starting with the LinkedIn Live interviews. So this interview, which I'm doing with Gary now, will sit on LinkedIn. So the replay will be available as soon as we're finished, as well as the live. I'm using a product called Switcher Studio. So when I look over here, that's where my iPad is, which is running all of this. So I'm also recording the video of it and the audio. So the video and the audio will be the video, sorry, will be uploaded to YouTube and Facebook. After this, we'll put the recordings out there to my YouTube channel and to Facebook. I will clip bits out of the video for Reels as well. So put those out there on Instagram and Facebook as Reels, and YouTube Shorts these days as well. I don't really do TikTok. I know I should, and I know some of this would make great content on TikTok as well. So we start with the LinkedIn Live. We take the video and put it out in full on YouTube. We take the video out and put it out in full on Facebook as well. We chop it up into Reels for Facebook and Instagram and YouTube Shorts. I could do TikTok as well, and then we strip off the audio and put that out as a podcast. So out of this interview, we'll get 8 platform's worth of content, and as far as the reels are concerned, we'll probably get 4 or 5 reels out of this, which will go out as well. So this creates tons of content for me. The only thing that I don't do, Wes, and should, is I could run it all through Otter.ai afterwards and actually put it out as a written piece of content as well. So I like repurposing. Picking up on Gary's point about whether people are comfortable on camera, I am, and I enjoy doing these, but I start with the video. There is absolutely no reason, if you're recording a podcast, why you shouldn't just put, this is a Logitech stream cam clip to my desk. There's no reason why you shouldn't just pop one of those on and record the whole process as well. Damien's asked a really interesting question, which gives you the chance to plug yourself, Gary. Damien wants to know, do you run any courses about podcasting?
Funny enough, I do. So yes, shameless plug. Yes, I do. I run them every couple of months, and they normally theme around either launching a podcast. So for the people who haven't got a clue about how to actually use a podcast or run a podcast or launch a podcast, dedicated to the launch process. And then alternating to the launch, there was the 101 workshop where we talk about the basics, the mistakes that people make, and cover just general kind of bits about podcasting. And then actually there's one that's going to be formed later on in the year, which is for people who want to become guests on podcast, and giving them live tips about how to do it, how to make sure that they know exactly what to do. And it's all available on the website, as you can see on screen there. So yeah, there's different workshops and different courses coming out.
I'm just going to pop us back on screen, and then for to answer Damien's question, and for everyone else, there's the bit of Gary's website which deals with that as well. So let's talk about the other bit then, Gary, because if you've got time to talk about that. So we've talked about the tech and that sort of thing. What thought at the outset should people put into their podcasts then? I'm really interested to hear this for myself.
So first of all, the tech is important, but the tech, if you don't get the idea right and haven't got the kind of legs and make the podcast as robust as possible, the tech's just going to be sitting on the shelf collecting dust, just like that expensive golf kit you've got in the corner, or the expensive triathlon bike that you've never used. We've all been there, we've all done it. But with the idea, this is what most people should spend time thinking about, because this is where you basically build the foundations of your podcast. Now, when I talk about the idea, what I mean is the basics. So what is the actual podcast going to be about? What content are you going to be sharing with your audience? Then, first of all, then before that even, who is your audience? Who's going to be listening to your podcast? What do they want to hear? What value can you do? What guests do they want to listen to? What stories are going to educate them, inspire them? What ideas do they want to share? Do you want to share with them? All of this stuff you need to kind of work out before you even think about the equipment and about what you need. Because if you haven't got the audience nailed down, then actually, do you know what? You can have all the fancy equipment, but you've got nothing to record on it. If you haven't got the right guests appearing on your show, then actually your audience is going to switch off. If you're not, to be fair, building a community around your podcast, which is also something that I talk about in the idea process, then actually you can have a great podcast which has got loads of valuable content, but no one's going to know about it. All of this stuff needs to be considered in the idea. So that, to me, is more important than the equipment you get, the hosting platforms you get. Don't get me wrong, they are important, but you don't want to be the best kept secret, and you want to make sure that actually the content you're providing is brilliant for the audience. So nail the audience, nail the content, nail the guests, nail all that stuff first, and then start thinking about actually creating the podcast brand, creating the kind of the way that you're going to market it, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, the idea for me is so important. And we saw that during lockdown. Loads of people started podcasts during lockdown, which made a massive boom in the industry. Podcasting was a buzzword. Everyone was talking about it. Well, yeah, most people were talking about it if they weren't talking about something else during lockdown. And loads of people started it, which was fantastic. But because their idea wasn't nailed down, they hadn't figured out what content they were going to share on a long-term basis. They hadn't worked out really how it was going to fit into their lives, how it was going to fit into their business, how it was going to give value to their community. Most of them stopped after 6 or 7 episodes because they ran out of steam, or life got in the way, or the guest didn't turn up, so therefore they didn't release one. And there's loads of other reasons, but a lot of people started it in lockdown and just didn't carry on, and that's because the idea wasn't robust enough. So for me, working on the idea, working on those core principles of how does it fit into my business, how does it fit into my life, how does it fit into my community, are so important, so important. So I've started ranting, but you can tell that I'm kind of passionate about this.
I think that's huge because I think that's where I tripped up. I obviously quite like the sound of my own voice, but I've started my podcast a couple of times, Gary, and have never had the consistency on it, and it's become obvious that I need your help to talk about it. I think Damien wants your help as well. Damien wants to set up a virtual coffee with you as well, which I think would be amazing.
Cool.
But yeah, I guess they don't just start a TV program or a radio program and just wing it, do they? They actually put some thought into the first 10 episodes, the first 3 months, whatever it happens to be.
Yeah, there's certain key bits that I always get people to do even before we start talking about the equipment, and that is, first of all, make a plan of your first 12 episodes. That for me is a basic kind of requirement, because if you know you're going to be able to do 12 episodes, first of all, you've broken that 6 or 7 episodes, which most people have kind of gone through or stopped at. But then also, you know how the programs, how each episode is going to kind of carry on from each other. You know what guests you need. You know if you're going to be thrown in some solo episodes or you're going to develop in content, but you're going to have a plan. And during those 12 episodes, you can also work out how it fits into your business plan if it is part of your business. So how it fits in your marketing strategy. Actually, talking about the marketing strategy, when is it best to launch a podcast, in terms of your marketing strategy based on what you've got coming up. But you can factor all of those bits in. And then you can factor in also how it fits into your community. How is it going to support your community, give value to your community? Who in your community can you get in to help you with the podcast, either as a guest or as a co-host or whatever that could be? There's so much stuff to think about. And it's only when you take an outside step outside of your podcast and look at it, you can sometimes kind of see how big it will be. But you're dead right. You wouldn't plan a TV show, a radio show, without planning the kind of what content they're going to be sharing. But the truth is, with a podcast, you could literally launch a podcast in an hour. It's as simple as that. But it wouldn't go anywhere. You need to set that time, build those foundations, and then it'll be so much stronger for the future. So much stronger.
Well, Damien Bridgman has just made my day. Damien has said, "I'm so glad I took the time to listen to this today. It's amazing." Thank you, Damien. I'm pleased that I bullied Gary into giving up some of his time to be here, because I know Gary's busy. You've talked about community, Gary. Thank you, Damien. Thank you for the feedback.
Thank you.
You've talked about community. You've built the community around Grow Radio, which I'm just going to put up on screen now. So just, if you wouldn't mind, just tell us a little bit about what Grow Radio is and what it actually does.
Yeah. So as I said before, most people started in lockdown thinking about launching a podcast. I spent lockdown planning how to run a radio station. So effectively, Grow Radio is a platform that allows all of the people who I'm talking to about podcasting a place to come and hang out. So for the people who have no idea what a podcast is, who just wants to listen to a podcast, they can tune in, and there's a different podcast playing on the hour every hour. So they've always got different podcasts to listen to. For the people who have got a podcast who want to showcase it and kind of shout about it a little bit more, then they can host their podcast they can play their podcast on Grow Radio. And for the people who want to improve their podcasting skills as a guest or just someone who wants to start getting into podcasting, there's blogs, there's a marketplace where they can get different equipment in, services. effectively, it's just building that community around podcasting so people can come to Grow Radio, and doesn't matter what their skill level they are at it, they can kind of come along and check it out.
That looks. I knew a little bit about Grow Radio already, but when you start talking about it, it seems like such a good idea. You're giving people a place to belong. There's obviously some names on there that I recognise already. I spotted Keith Blakemore Noble's name popping up on there as well, the wonderful Keith, and I know you've got other people on there who I know as well. Where we've people get very tied up with building a huge audience. Is that something that people should think about a lot, growing their audience on their podcast?
They should, but I don't think they should necessarily kind of be focused on growing a large audience, because I've always thought to myself, and this is just my own personal opinion about making content. If one person does something different based on what they've seen, what they've heard, or the content that I've produced, I'm happy. I'm happy with that. So for me, it's never about growing large numbers. It's about someone listening to my content or watching my content or coming to one of my courses, whatever it is, and then doing something differently. Doing something different about it. That for me is more important. So for me, growing large audiences will come with generating that content and getting the audience right and providing value and having fun with it and getting them involved. But I wouldn't necessarily start a podcast to grow a large audience. I think that's the wrong way around. And I think it's about giving the value to them and getting them to do something differently, or thinking about doing something differently instead.
Yeah, you're echoing Gary Vaynerchuk's words there, really, and the way that I've always tried to do things is not, and Terry Wogan. Terry Wogan famously always said that he only had one listener. He wanted to make sure that everyone who listened to his program got value from the time that they gave to him, and that's sort of echoed now in what Gary Vaynerchuk says and what you're saying, thinking about the value that you give to people. There was a question that I really wanted to ask, and this isn't about having your own podcast. This is about a strategy that I've used. How much value is there in being a podcast guest on other people's podcasts if you're not ready to have your own yet?
It's huge. It's a huge opportunity. It gives massive value, not only to you as someone who's able to share your message, but also to the person who you're going on to their show and their audience. It's a massive opportunity for most people, and it's an opportunity that most people don't really understand that much. And I didn't realize this until I started talking to more and more people about it. And for me, being a guest on podcast gives so many benefits to you as a kind of a guest. Not only does it help you spread your message to a new audience, it helps you to hone your message, because every time you say something, you're getting better at saying it. You're becoming more confident. You might fluff up a few times, but actually you won't fluff up again if you learn from your mistakes. But it helps you hone your message. It also means that actually you're developing those connections with different people. I'm going to have a virtual coffee with Damien. I'm happy with that. That's my job done for the day. So for me, it's about making sure if you're a guest, you are providing that value to that person. But you've got to make sure that you are matching yourself and matching your skills and your message to the right podcasts. Because if you're not going on the right podcasts based on your experiences and your skills, then actually you're pitching to the wrong audience. You might not be giving that value. And also, you've got to make sure that when you're going on looking at being a podcast guest, you're matching yourself up to the host as well. You listen to a few of their previous episodes to make sure that you're happy with the content that they're going to be asking and the content you're going to be sharing. You also want to make sure that and you're matching their pace and their talk, their pace, their language, their energy. There's a lot of stuff to consider when you're becoming a guest on a podcast, but simply it's a great opportunity for people to spread your message and to actually learn from you and to connect with other people. I love it. I think more people should definitely do it.
I have always taken the opportunity to guest on other people's podcasts when I've been asked, because I try and make sure I bring value to their audience, and I imagine that you'll have picked up a couple of new followers from this today, Gary. Damien. Hello to John Gray, who's recently joined us. Obviously, you and Damien seem to be in conversation now as well, and I've always felt that if I can bring value to someone else's audience, that's great. And then a really lovely side effect of that is that I pick up some more followers because they liked what I had to say. I've never ever turned down exposure to someone else's audience. I think it's really flattering to be asked to take advantage of that. Really,
I think I definitely, and what I love about being a guest also is that you get asked different questions that other people don't ask, and it's all about actually having that conversation, just having that chat with someone, and doing it live like this. It's great because we get the audience interaction at the same time. There's no downsides to being a guest on a podcast.
no, I've always loved this format of doing lives where we can bring the questions in as well. Just reading what Damien has to say, he will increase being a guest on other people's podcasts. He's landed some big clients, and was able to get in front of a really good speaking agent because she heard me on a podcast. Someone once said, Damien, that every big opportunity starts with a little conversation. And to me, that's what all of this is about. I want to come back to one of Damien's questions from really early on, Gary. We've talked about that you can get started with a phone. If people want to take it further, what sort of equipment would you recommend they should invest in if they're going further in their podcast journey?
So there's two bits of equipment that I would recommend, and that's a decent camera and a decent microphone. So if you are going to be doing it visual, then making sure that the visual is crisp and sharp, and the lighting's good, so much better. And also a decent microphone. And you've already mentioned the brand Logitech. They do some absolutely cracking material. I've got a Logitech camera that I'm running through this, and because I'm at home at the moment, so I'm not in the studio or the office. I've got the Blue Yeti by Logitech microphone. They're good, decent bits of kits, and the microphones can start from £100, kind of going upwards. The webcams pretty much the same kind of price. I think I'm running £300-400 worth of kit at the moment. But to be fair, it all depends on what your level is going to be, because you can spend £200-300 on a really good microphone, have it going for a sound processor, and you can get a really good quality of sound. Equally, you can spend it £100 and get the same amount. It all depends on what level you want to go to. And also, obviously, if you're at home, you've got to have a separate different bit of kit than what you would have in a studio or an office. So in a proper studio, you'd have soundproofing, you'd have different webcams positioned in different places. You might have a couple of microphones, and they might have a boom arm so it stops the vibration, pop filter to stop the popping on the P's and the T's and all that stuff. But it's about finding your level. But for me, decent camera, decent microphone will pretty much do probably 60 to 70% of different people's needs when it comes to podcasting. And that, you can spend, a couple of £100 on both of those, and you'll be well away with those.
I have a Blue Yeti mic over in the corner of the office, although it's sort of ironically they're actually red in colour. I use that. I use that very regularly. Let's put that away. I'm currently using a Rode USB mic, which is my mic of preference these days, mainly because it's a whole lot smaller.
Yep.
And a Logitech StreamCam attached to my MacBook, and then Switcher Studio to run all of this. So that's the kit that I use. I have got a couple of lights here as well, because the lighting in this room isn't always good. But genuinely, aside from the MacBook that I use every day anyway, there's literally a couple of £100 worth of kit to do all of this. Hello to Fiona Scott, and I will see you on Friday in Swindon, Fiona, for Fiona's networking event, which I'm looking forward to. Fiona has a podcast herself, which by all means pop a link to it in the comments, Fiona, because Fiona talks about PR and is amazing at PR. Jen has asked a brilliant question, which I should have asked ages ago. How much time will it take up, Gary, if you're going to do all of it yourself? And secondary question, how often do you recommend posting a new episode?
Oh, good questions. Good questions, big questions. So, how much time does it take? All depends on how often you're going to be releasing it. So, I'm going to tackle that one first. So, most people, I say most people, it all depends on how much time you've got to spend on the podcast. I would say it's better to release and be consistent in releasing episodes. So if you can focus on doing it weekly, do it weekly. If you can focus doing it fortnightly, do it fortnightly. Hell, if you can't, if you think actually I can probably do one a month to start off with, do one a month. Make sure you're consistently posting them at the time frame when you're happy with. In terms of how much time it takes to actually do it, that all depends on how detailed you want to get into it. I know some people who literally, if they were jumping on a live like this, you'd probably spend about 15, 20 minutes organising the live beforehand. Might have a chat before and we might jump onto it. So that might take another hour or so, depending on how long it takes. And then what you're doing afterwards is really up to you. You know, some people edit the ums and the ahs out of it. That could take another hour onto it. Releasing it, marketing it, you probably could take another couple of hours. But I know some people who literally just jump on a live, then record it, release it as an MP3, and job done. So it takes literally no time. So it can take as little or as much time as you want it to. For me, I would make as simple as possible. So your setup in terms of going live, recording, stripping it all out and making sure that you've got all the content from there is spot on. And if you can probably allocate, I don't know, 4 hours a week or 4 hours per episode to do that from start to finish, I think you're onto a winner. But I say it doesn't have to be that long. I know some people also who record 5 to 10 minutes episodes, and they can spend a couple of hours recording the content and have a whole month's worth of content all in one go. It all depends on how long the episodes are and how often you want to do it. Sorry if it's a very fluffy answer, but that's a big question. Big questions to kind of ask. And we could do a whole podcast just on those.
I think that's what we're trying to do, is condense a load of advice into one episode here, but it does feel like, well, you already have made series out of this, and Fiona is coming on and agreeing with you, and saying, and this is perhaps where I went wrong, Fiona, and I'll pick your brains about this as well. Your audience subliminally understands your schedule and then expects it. So be consistent to keep your audience engaged. And Fiona goes on to say that she does 2 episodes a month herself because that's what works for her.
Yeah, and you know what? It's always better to increase the frequency rather than to be ad hoc about it. So if you start with a monthly or 2 a month, and then you think, actually, I can throw a bonus episode in, well, why not? Why not? It's better to do that rather than to say that you're going to go weekly or monthly or fortnightly and then not do a episode. Because once you've not done one episode, you're more likely to not do another episode. And as Fiona said, if someone's expecting you to release content and you haven't, chances are they probably won't wait until you release it to look for something else to watch and to fill that time.
Fiona is a TV producer. Correct me, Fiona, if I've got your title wrong, but Fiona says that she learnt that working in TV, that of course TV still in 2023 runs to schedules. One more thing that I'll throw in for the few people out there who are watching or listening to this and speak, I carry one of those, particularly when I'm speaking at business shows or networking events. I do connect a lapel mic to it and keep that in my pocket. So if I'm speaking at a business show, a networking event, things like that, I record the audio of me speaking as well. I really should put more of those out as podcasts as well. We seem to have the Wiltshire Massive in here now because Roland Millwood has joined us as well. Hello, Roland. That's, I think, everyone in Wiltshire is here this afternoon. But that's when I'm speaking, I've got, like I say, I've got that usually in my breast pocket, and I've got a yes, the line in there. I've got the Rode lapel mics actually connected to that, so the sound quality is never going to be pristine on that because I'm speaking in front of an audience. But I quite like the sort of reportage aspect of that, Gary, that you get a bit of audience noise as well.
Yeah, and you know what? It gives a bit of kind of ambience, doesn't it, really, to it? And I do like that myself. And I can remember 4 years ago, and it's funny, it was 4 years ago yesterday, that actually we met at a networking event and I recorded a podcast using the Zoom HD.
I spotted that on Facebook. So that was, I think, at the Waitley Hall Hotel in Banbury, sort of between where I live and where you live.
That's exactly it. Exactly it. And that was recorded on Zoom HD1N kind of dictaphone. And we were just going back and forth. And yeah, having a bit of background noise isn't the worst thing in the world, because actually you're naturally going to have background noise pretty much anywhere where you are. What you don't want to do is to have a background noise overcompensating the voice and having the voice sound quality diminished because of the background noise. And all of the stuff that you've said about the lapel mics, the dictaphones, that all basically minimizes the gap between the mouth and the recording device, which means that actually you get a bit of ambient noise, but not too much. And do you know what? It's quite funny. It's those bits of equipment, for the people who think it might be expensive, they're really not that expensive. And I picked up a pretty dirt cheap, it's 30 quid for a pair, lapel mics, just for literally a client to use, that plugged into their phone so they record literally as they were recording it. And it's a cracking bit of kit. It is a really cracking bit of kit. So you don't need to spend much on the equipment. It just has to be good quality equipment, and been trying to test it everywhere else. There's loads of reviews on equipment, and I can put a couple of links, if that's okay, in the comments. We have a couple of kind of more detailed blogs that I've done about equipment, because it is about getting the right equipment, but you don't have to spend the world on it.
I think that's a really important point. I'm going to say that if anyone's got any questions for the last few minutes of this, pop them in the comments below. I think the advice that you don't have to spend a ton on it is really important, and it's sort of where we started, because I think people get hung up with that. I think the advice, and if you've not seen that bit of the interview, watch it on replay and find it. The advice where Gary talks about how to plan your podcast before you buy any kit is really, really important. Where should people find you, Gary, if they want to connect with you? I know you're on LinkedIn. I'll give people time to ask any more questions, but whilst they're thinking about that, where should people find you? Where are the best places to connect with you?
So I'm on, as Steph said, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm also on Facebook and Twitter. My profile picture is basically that, as you can see on the screen. So me with my 2 thumbs up on all the platforms. My name's Gary Jones. You can find details about Grow Radio. There you go, 2 thumbs up. That's a good solid profile picture there. And yeah, I even put up my business card at one point in time. It's brilliant. But yeah, find me on all the different social media platforms. I haven't really got into TikTok, but Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, happy days. There's 2 sides of me. There's the training side of it, which is Grow Marketing Media, and then there's the broadcasting side, which is Grow Radio. So each of them have got their own separate platforms on the different profiles on the different platforms. So if you do want to find out more about podcasting, head over to Grow Radio to kind of engage with the community there. But also, if you want to know about training, pop to Grow Marketing Media. But yeah, that's where you can find us on socials.
And Fiona has suggested, and you are both members of Connect, the networking organisation which I run. I'm really glad I've done this, because you and Fiona seem to be talking as well. Fiona says, how about being on my podcast, and vice versa, should be fun. I think that would be a great place. John Gray, this is a brilliant question, John. John has a teenage Gen Z audience. do you think podcasting is suitable for that age group? Just before you jump in there, Gary, my 19-year-old listens to a ton of podcasts, John. Political podcasts, that's what he's studying at university. But my 19-year-old listens to podcasts all the time. So from personal experience, teenagers do listen. So from John Gray's point of view, Gary, Gen Z audiences, Gen Z audiences, teenagers, are they a good audience for podcasts?
Definitely. You just need to make sure that the content's relevant for them. They've got a slightly shorter kind of time that they normally listen to. Not by much, but a little bit more shorter. So make sure your messages are more succinct and more concise. But yeah, for sure. And again, the beauty of podcasting is if you create a podcast, like Steph said right at the start, you can repurpose it into different bits of content. So one podcast could be 5 or 10 videos on TikTok or Instagram Reels. So definitely have a podcast, but make sure that the content is relevant for them.
Yeah, I think that works for. Well, it just does work for I don't think it works for every single audience. Gary's advice there is just spot on. If you get the content right, the audience will like it and start sharing it with people as well. That obviously makes a ton of sense. Fiona says her 16-year-old loves podcasts and girls in their early 20s. It's their choice of radio program. That's a generation that isn't used to things being on at a particular time and having to stick to that. They can listen to it whenever they want to. John, I hope that answers your questions. Yeah, if anyone's got any questions on the replay, ask away. But Gary, that's been amazing. Any final thoughts before we wrap this up for the day?
I think for me, it's just about people about. If I was trying to sum it up, just use podcasting as a tool to help you develop your skills as well as your business and your community. If you're at a stage where you don't really listen to a podcast or you don't know where to start listening to podcasts, just download Spotify, Apple Podcasts, go to Grow Radio, wherever you kind of want to pick your podcast, and just start picking a few out and just start listening to it. Or if you want to become a guest on a podcast, put yourself out there. Just post on social media that anybody's got a podcast, I can talk about these topics. I'd love to be a guest on them. Throw it out there. Or if you want to start looking at becoming a regular podcast host and have your own show, start working on the idea. But don't think podcast is just another thing that could get done. Make sure podcast, when you're actually going to do it properly, is part of your marketing strategy. And make sure it is actually, gives value to the audience. But for me, don't be afraid of them. Just don't be afraid and get cracking on them.
Really amazing point from Damien to round up with, because I writing's what I do, as you know, Gary. That's my medium of choice to write stuff down. Yeah. And Damien has just made the point that he's dyslexic, so podcasts really work for him. I hadn't even given that any consideration at all, but it makes them extremely accessible, I guess. Yeah, brilliant point, Damien. Thank you for that. John says he's got his TikTok sorted with the wonderful people at Grey Skits, who I've not spoken to for ages, but Fiona introduced me to them ages ago. Thank you, Gary. Thank you for... Look, we've talked for like an hour, and it's just absolutely flown by, and I could sit here and talk to you all afternoon about this. Let's take the anniversary and actually go up and meet up in Banbury at some point. Let's me and you hook up in Banbury and actually do a repeat of this, and we'll point a camera at both of us and do this live. Thank you, Gary, for joining us. If you folk aren't connected with him already, then please do, and go and check out Grow Radio as well, which I'm going to pop back on the screen just before we come off screen. Yeah, there's Grow Radio. There's where you'll find it. You can see the URL up there, growradio.co.uk, where you'll find a ton of Gary's content and his guests' content. Were you about to say something?
I was going to say it's no co in it. It's just growradio.uk.
Oh!
It's just UK.
Just look, I got that wrong. That's down to my eyesight more than anything else.
You know what, if you can go to growradio.co.uk and it will take you to a gardening podcast, and that's absolutely fine. But no, it's just .uk. Sorry to kind of cut in there.
No, although you couldn't see it, although the audience couldn't see it, sorry, I've got Gary on another screen where I can see him even when he's not on your screen, and he was like furiously waving at me. So I knew I'd done something wrong. On that note, Fiona has invited us to do a podcast day down in Swindon. I think we should do that. Let's head down to Swindon and do that as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Gary, thank you ever so much for your time.
No, thank you, Steph. That's been brilliant.
I'm going to take you off screen just whilst I do the bit and press the button which takes us off LinkedIn. Thank you to all the rest of us, all the rest of you, sorry, for joining me and Gary talking. If you've got any questions left, pop them in the comments. We'll still answer them on the replay.